Hi Daniel, welcome to Digital Shift. I'm the host June von Bunin and Alan is the co-host. We would like to start with your introduction, Daniel.
So I'm CTO and member of the executive board at Datahouse. Datahouse is an ETH spin-off that has combined expertise from computer science as well as statistics for the last 15 years. So basically we've been doing data science since before the term grew as popular as it is today. My personal background is actually neither in computer science nor in statistics itself. I'm originally a physicist, but then again, high energy physics today is more or less applied statistics in action. You can work with huge amounts of data and get interesting insights out of analyzing this data.
Thank you for your introduction. We are very interested in hearing what you have to say about our situation now in terms of how to take decisions in terms of incomplete data such as we see today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, right? Because at the one hand, you always have incomplete data, and our mind is very good in reorganizing this data in a way that we think it is complete. And then again, if you come in a situation as unusual as we are this year, then we kind of fail at this task and begin to realize that, well, maybe now we really have incomplete information and we still need to take some crucial decisions. From the uncertainty point of view, there are two kinds. There is the statistical uncertainty and the systematic uncertainty. And while from our background, we are very used to deal with statistical uncertainty and are kind of comfortable doing that, of course, the situation we have right now also includes a huge amount of systematic uncertainty. Some institutions begin to be pushed to their limits, and this makes taking decision a lot more difficult than if you just have to kind of factor out the statistical fluctuations that we are more used to.
May I circle back? I think for our audience, it would be good if you could define or explain statistical uncertainty and systemic uncertainty.
For statistical uncertainty is what you have when observing let's say, the same event again and again, and just by some fluctuations, you get some measurement errors. So let's say you try to measure the length of some nails you find lying around, and then you will measure one nail to be 4 millimeters, one nail to be 3.5 millimeters. Just they fluctuate a little bit because it's not possible to manufacture them in a way that all of them have exactly the same length. And then this is what you would call a statistical uncertainty. But now if your ruler that you use to measure the nails is maybe a bit out of order, it's a bit too long or a bit too short, then you will measure the nails shorter or longer than they are, and you will do this every time, and this is what you then would call a systematic uncertainty. So something not caused just by statistical fluctuations one would expect, but something really caused by the system you use to measure or to observe something.
Thank you, that was nice and clear. And then the second question is, you mentioned something about institutions and the systemic uncertainty. Now you have to go deeper into that.
I mean, one example I'd like to mention here is maybe we should not talk about the run on toilet paper because nobody really understands why toilet paper was that important during the early days of Corona. But just to run on all the groceries, right? If you lived in Switzerland even for the last 40 or 50 years or so, you probably have never seen a situation where the stores run out of certain kinds of pasta or rice or whatever. And of course, they did not run out. It was just a supply problem, but just to see that some things could fail, or maybe not really fail, but apparently fail that quickly, I think was kind of interesting.
It's just in a very interdependent world. Everything is connected. Very small changes might ripple out, and you then, in this situation, you see that very strange things happen.
Yeah, sure. And you usually underestimate how many interconnections there are, in the same way one tends to underestimate the amount of uncertainty there is about the future.
But I think one takeaway is that there are many more things that can go wrong than you think. So
Yes.
Just in general. So then, would you know any like meaningful strategies how to plan or how to go forward if actually you have to factor in that a lot more can go wrong?
Maybe let's try to go back to the business world here, right? And Datahouse is developing and working in a lot of IT projects, and IT projects are also an area where one kind of usually underestimates the amount of uncertainty there is. And there have been enormous developments during the last maybe 2 decades or so on the principal approach you use to do such projects, right? If you look at an IT project done maybe 20 years ago, you would basically write the book, what the software should do. Then you would hand over that book to a supplier, and they would program what you have written in the book. And you all know the funny story and comics about what was specified, what the developer understood, what the customer got in the end. And I mean, this is kind of true. There is so much uncertainty in the process. It's kind of mute to try to factor out all the uncertainty just by writing as much specification as you can. And there the whole agility and going agile plans, I think really helped. Even the term agile, of course, has been beaten to death over the last few years. Every company wants to be agile right now, and yeah, of course we are. But still, the core idea behind the agile approach to a project, so working in iterations, make sure that you reach certain goals that can be tested and verified in an iteration, and do that in communication with all the stakeholders. And so in my opinion is a really good approach to deal with uncertainty. And this really is the crucial point. If you have to plan into a more uncertain future, you have to do this in shorter iterations, or you have to plan more different scenarios in advance. And at some points, the amount of possible scenarios just explode and is unhandleable. So then the only way out is to do shorter planning cycles.
Yeah. Are there other strategies, like from this agile working environment, you think are easy transferable?
The thing, if you would have asked me a year ago, I guess I would have told you, oh, well, that's easy. We used to work from remote locations and so on. And we are, and of course, in a tech-oriented world, it's very easy to work from everywhere. But one should never underestimate the power of just those random conversations happening at the coffee machine or over the table. And if you do not have that in the office, it's easy. It's very important to involve the people actively, because otherwise you will maybe never hear from half of them, because they think they are on track and working, and you really need to actively involve them in the discussion and the decision making.
Yeah, you can no longer just give orders. You have like look the whole thing as a complex system and get involved in the system. Otherwise it will just not work.
Yeah, exactly. And even though I would argue that in the IT and data science industry, we're kind of used to this modus operandi. So we're not in a world where some people just give orders and the other people just execute, right? It's a more collaborative approach anyway in this complex system sense that you just described. But even though I would argue that we're quite advanced there, it's something else, whether you're doing it because you want to, or whether you have to do it because you're basically not allowed anymore to meet at the office.
Right. Before we had the camera rolling, you mentioned something about, again, databases. We were speaking about incomplete databases or ever-changing databases. And then you mentioned something about how to interpret these databases. Can you please elaborate?
Yeah, I will try not to elaborate for too long, because obviously as a person trained quite a bit in statistics and how to correctly apply data analysis principle, I spent the better part of the first few weeks of Corona wondering about all the rubbish being published on Twitter and also more serious platforms. Basically, everybody who could work with Excel suddenly decided they were an expert in predicting how the virus would spread. And then, of course, this would lead to people believing one thing and the other half of the people believing the other thing. And I've mentioned it to quite a few people during this time. I was never so happy that I'm not the federal council who has to decide in the end what data to trust and what measures to take. I think they really had, they have earned their money during this crisis time for sure. But then if you look at this COVID case data collection a bit more closely, also with the statisticians' mind, one has to admit that it's a very complex system to analyze, because you never have all the data available, right? And maybe you remember the last, let's call it, global pandemic in 2009, the swine flu pandemic. And this is long enough ago that the statisticians were able to do some analysis after the fact. And actually, if you look at all the papers being published during the first 4 months of the swine flu pandemic event, and I'm really talking about published papers, not about some random Twitter post, published papers in serious scientific journals, the case fatality ratio of this virus was somewhere in between 1 case in every 100,000 infections, and the highest estimate was somewhere around 10,000 in every 100,000 infections. So the serious statistic predictions varied within 4 to 5 orders of magnitude during the first half year or so. And I mean, this is astonishing, because basically it tells us that the statistics approach we have is more or less useless. And of course, nobody knows today how 10 years from now the data analysis capabilities during this current crisis will be judged. And I would argue there is some progress back from 2009, but still you're working with a very incomplete set of data. You choose some people to test, or basically they choose themselves because they show up for testing, and then some of them are positive, some of them are not. You need to consider that not on every day of the week the laboratories are working, then of course there was this interesting story about sending case reports via fax machines and so on, and putting them on a scale to find out how many faxes came in. Nobody knows whether it's really true, but still then you have all those messiness, and they pile up on top of each other, and this makes a serious analysis in the end extremely difficult.
So before the lockdown, a lot of systems have been built up to eradicate uncertainty, to make us feel certain. What do you think of that?
So yeah, I mean, firstly, I'm not sure the systems that have been built really reduced uncertainty. Maybe they just reduced the amount of uncertainty we felt. So this would be the first interesting point to discuss. And then again, I guess a lot of people realize that not all the uncertainty can be taken care of in advance, and for some situations you just have to be able to adapt and to be able to embrace the change, because you cannot really influence it by yourself.
No, it was quite nice. So Maruga just some days ago said when they were like lowering the threshold for big events, at the same time they had very high cases, which was a contradiction. And then she said, well, we just have to get used to that things might contradict. And I found it very nice that the politician finally says something like that. This was very not Swiss.
Yeah, at some point you have to admit that sometimes you have some contradiction in life and in the world, yes. And I guess one can disagree whether it was a wise decision to put this limit out of operation while at the same time the cases rise. On the other hand, I mean, you shouldn't make any decision based just on a single day or on a 3-day average case number, but you should make decisions based on the larger trends. And then of course the larger trends are a lot more uncertain, which makes taking these decisions a lot more difficult.
So basically you have to take decisions and you have to be aware that your data is actually will not give you complete answers. So there are like strategies, you can try to choose the option which gives you the most other options. That doesn't put you into a dead end. Into a dead end. And so we're mostly interested in because I think that's the kind of thinking you need to have today. So because you will not know what's going to happen and you have to move somehow forward still.
Yeah, you could take the most safe options or the option with the least amount of predicted damages, or you can, as you said, take the option that gives you the most options to go towards in the future. And I would argue that you need a good mix of the both, right? You cannot just take the option associated with the most risk just because it gives you the most options in the future.
Daniel, what do you think should we learn from the last few months?
On the one hand, I guess we need to learn to live with more uncertainty than we're used to. And then, I mean, from a more technological point of view, I guess we should learn that accurate data collection and digitalization is actually important, and not just the big word politicians try to move around to gain some votes. But especially in the early days of the crisis, you could really see that some of the federal offices maybe have not yet adapted to 21st century technology in a way they should have. And I guess this is also an important lesson, that accurate and timely available data can really help you to reduce uncertainty and to take decisions that are based on the actual facts and not just on the best numbers you have available from measuring a stack of paper of faxes being sent in over the last weeks.
Right.
And then of course, I guess this whole data literacy topic. So how do we interpret results? How are people perceiving certain visualizations and charts? What are people taught in school on how to read a chart, how to interpret data, and so on, which in my opinion is important also on a larger level than just the current crisis. But this was just a nice example of fake data analysis, or maybe not fake, but well manipulated data analysis showing up on Twitter and similar platforms. And I would argue that for many people, it's really difficult to differentiate one from the other and to judge for themselves on what data to believe, whether it is really that bad if cases jump from 100 to 200 during the day, or whether they should only worry if the 7-day weekly average doubles over the course of 1 week. And I guess this is an important topic also for the education world to improve this overall data literacy in society.
Let us conclude with our last question. What advice do you have for us?
Well, I guess the important point there is that you need to realize in what sense your data is incomplete, because you will have to live with this incomplete data world. It's not possible to know everything, but the important thing is to know as exactly as possible where the limits of your data are, or what the precision of your data is, to formulate this in another way. And then, of course, always a good thing to plan for uncertainties, to plan in different scenarios. So not to just think about what you would do in the most probable scenario that could happen next week, but that you maybe also think about what you would do in scenario number 2, 3, and 4 that could unfold over the next weeks and months.
Thank you for your time and a very interesting discussion, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.